Design goes beyond the outside wrapper. It goes well into the facilities that operate the building. There are several examples in this city where buildings will ultimately not stand the test of time and become largely redundant well before they were intended to. So the panel introducing today, representing the design, Cecil Balmond, structural engineer, sculptor, and polymath, has been an innovation and exploration pioneer in terms of design and engineering for years, working initially with Arup and later with the world-renowned artists like Anish Kapoor. He has written numerous books on the design process, informal, crossover, element. He was appointed Officer of the Order of the British Empire and OBE in the 2015 New Year's Honours List for services to architecture. Representing construction, Patrick Condon, an architect and regional design technical director with Dragages in Asia. Dragages are construction giants and part of the global Bouygues group. Patrick has extensive experience in finding buildable solutions to consultants' concepts. This is often about matching construction technology with performance or aesthetic objectives and is very much about innovation and creation. Representing the end user or the customer, Hugo Slade from Slade Property Services is a leading property agent here in Yangon, whose role is to act as bridge and facilitator between tenants and developers. The agent's role is to find commercial solutions that work for both sides of tenant and landlord relationships. And in a period of accelerated change, he has to adapt and adopt new ways of doing things. And finally, and certainly not least, representing the developer, Stephen Purvis, head of real estate for Yoma Land, a leading property developer. Stephen is an architect by profession, but has 35 years of acting on developer side of the equation. His approach to development is a never-ending quest for innovation in the ancient business of placemaking and habitat.
Well, I think offices are really some of the least contentious type of projects for the relationships between designer, developer, and builder, because both the business model and the design model is well understood. So planning grids, letting strategies, efficiencies, these are quite well understood and gives confidence to builders and clients in the assumptions being made. And having said that, the collaboration is quite intense at the beginning in terms of setting the best parameters for the project between agent and client, in my experience. And of course, there's a cost controller coming in as it sort of segues towards construction. And then, of course, comes an intense phase with the contractor and value engineering, where compromise has to be made and certain hard decisions taken by the designer and by the client to agree to certain things. In speculative office building, it's fairly a throughput in terms of we all understand what we're about. It's a well-known model, as Stephen said, or I think you said at the beginning. Where it gets far more intense in collaboration and tensions do arise would be in pre-let, where we've had experience in London, of course, of big projects being pre-let. And then there's a huge stress and emphasis on pre-ordering, long-term, long lead items, all coming on time, plus handing over the project on time, commissioning lifts, all sorts of things. The pressure grows much more on the site phase. And of course, owner-occupier probably is the nightmare one in a way, where you get the owner wanting all kinds of things as trends change and as the market situation also changes. So there's a constant change going on. And bespoke offices like that are more one-off. So they're not part of the tradition of general office technology and building.
Okay. Patrick, perhaps throw in a few words.
One aspect I think we quite enjoyed working on the Landmark project was that we got to come in quite early, and that's what we really like to do, is to join the teams, the engineers, join Cecil's team very early on and bring our knowledge up front, so we can help you make the right decisions and guide the design a bit in terms of efficiencies, and not have to do that kind of value engineering exercise at the end and the pain of taking things out. So the projects I think we enjoy the most, in fact, is where we can kind of get in the ground floor, which in fact is what Stephen did with us, and kind of provide that advice up front and kind of bake it into the scheme along with the design team, you know, rather than really kind of face pain later. And that was what we got to do on this project.
So Patrick, does that actually happen often, that you're able to get in on the ground, or is it a rarity?
More and more. There's more early contractor involvement. Sometimes kind of trusted partners, which was, you know, what I consider myself with you. We come in early, just out of that kind of trusted partnership. Sometimes there's attempts to extract that information with you in a tendering process and not really reimburse you for it, and then go back to the market as if you were just going straight to the market, and so that we're not too keen on. But now, in fact, a meeting I just was finishing as this one started was a proper ECI period of a year, you know, that we're tendering for, and that's more and more frequent. It's a very formal ECI process.
Good. So this is highly recommended for Myanmar developers to get the contractor on the ground early as possible.
And Peter, if you wouldn't mind if I chimed in as well. I mean, obviously very important for the design and contractor, but I would also throw in that it's also very useful to get a marketing representative or even, you know, property manager involved as early as you possibly can, so that you can fine-tune all the operational issues that there may be, which sometimes may be overlooked.
Yes, I would like to add to what Hugo is saying. I mean, the best projects I've been involved with have been when the whole team has been assembled as soon as possible. That is always hard with contracting, of course, because of procurement. But if there were ways to always bring that forward, it really helps. To have a builder on board as well does help, no question.
I must admit, sometimes it can be quite interesting in those preliminary meetings, trying to have that agreement between flash design and maximizing commercial terms. But it's very useful to get that right at an early stage.
And they don't need to be incompatible, though.
That's right. Yeah.
It's quite interesting. Sorry, if I could just add to that, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because Hugo, his role in all of this is verging on the alchemist, isn't it? It's the black art, because whereas Patrick is involved with trying to find practical solutions in order to build a building, and Cecil is involved in conceptualizing design, what Hugo's got to do, because buildings take, however you procure them, seemingly years to think about, design, build, and complete, what Hugo's got to do is to get his crystal ball out and try and work out what's going to be happening in 2 or 3 years down the line.
Yeah.
And everything works back from that, whether it is your costing and pricing strategy, your specification, everything to do with the experience of the building itself has to be based on an appreciation of the current market conditions, plus also the crystal ball. What's the world going to be looking like in the market for that building in 2 or 3 years' time when you finally complete? And that's probably the hardest part of it.
Well, ultimately, it's all about trying to find that sweet spot, really. There is always room for impressive design, but you have to make sure that is coupled with sustainability, environmental concerns, but then also ultimately, how valuable are those items to the end user, and is someone going to pay you more rent for something that is being designed in the way that it currently is? So it's all about being up to date with market trends, understanding what the end user wants, and then it's a negotiation between architect, contractor, and marketing agent to try and meet the best, to do the best that you can for the client, ultimately the developer, which is to lease the building as quickly as possible and also to maximize the commercial returns.
Yeah, I think there's a common misconception about developer, which is it's basically a bunch of guys in a darkened room with calculators just sort of working out yields and stuff. And I learned very on in the development business when I worked for a relatively small niche Jewish property developer in London, that development, you have to consider development as a part of a creative process. And he always said, you treat the spreadsheet just like a sketchbook.
Yeah, I've also been advised from people that know more than me that there is such a thing as over-analysis.
Yeah.
That there is a certain amount of gut feel that comes with being a property developer. And that I've always found that interesting.
Yes, and if you get into over-analysis, you also end up with a kind of static position that the US market is in.
Yeah.
Looking there has been very difficult because they atomize benchmarking down to such tiny bits. You cannot take a holistic look at a building.
And it gets delayed. Your projects get delayed. You've got to get on and build the thing. Otherwise, you will continually make adjustments and you're wasting huge amounts of money. There is, a perfect building does exist in some world, but ultimately you have to go ahead and build a building and you have to meet a time frame. The more delays that are caused by trying to adjust the smallest things means, you can always be chasing that IRR in a spreadsheet, but you've got to get on and build a building and realize that project.
And I think we can discuss this later with the things coming with sustainability as well.
Pardon me.
Or spreadsheets to do with carbon control, all sorts of things, and getting a wise head around all of that matters. If you take the standard model that I've been involved, certainly in the 70s, 80s in London, lots of office building going on with the financial center growing in London, a lot of Canary Wharf, all sorts of stuff we got involved in. As I said, the assumption of grids, letting strategies, efficiencies are there collectively in a team. But from a conceptual point of view then, in the hands of us would be shape, facades, and environmental control in the interiors. And the trend began in the 80s to larger floor spans, trading floors grew, double facades, mainly a thing in the West, extreme climates, chimney effects. And then in the last sort of 10, 20 years, the business process outsourcing market from the West to India, which I know quite a bit about, led to maximum backup generators, 100%, 150%, heavy duty batteries on floors, and IT backbones locally coupled to 2-3 floors in terms of functioning. And of course, post Grenfell, now we've got fire restrictions on facades. And I think there'll be a trend to grow with sprinklers and very strict compartmentation. And then we are facing COVID. Now, I think COVID's not a game changer. It will be done and dusted once the vaccine's around, but it is going to accelerate certain trends in space planning and hygiene-driven design for sure, and a much bigger, wider, maybe more intelligent focus on what sustainability means, because it's a loose word, but it will also incorporate energy audits and carbon audits in a different way. In terms of the innovation that I see coming is certainly structures now will start to look for less embodied carbon. And that will favor wood, natural materials, recycling, and refurbishment would come back in favor in some ways, particularly inner cities. And facades will also grow to be not so transparent, maybe, more stone, more hybrid materials in timber and wood. And hygiene-based design will move to things like, for certain, contactless doors, a bigger lobby space, and given more flexi time with people working at home, I see an interesting trend where executives will be the ones coming to work and more of the junior staff outside, outsourced, not coming to work. And I know major companies in London now stuck with very big empty buildings in King's Cross, not knowing what to do because half their, they've found that they can work without half their staff coming in. But the executives need to come in, they find. And so that would mean, interesting enough, from big open plan, going back to some kind of cellularization, which would be interesting. And even back to the very old 50s model in London of central corridors, with smaller compartments, but with breathing facades, much more fresh air into the equation, both fundamentally in supply and also in local controls through the facades. The higher rise buildings could be more naturally turned into breathing facades, whereas the low rise, it would be more openable windows within the facades. And interiors will also change in time. And the sustainability will grow, as I said, with apart from rain harvesting, LED controls, we know, it will be carbon auditing and a lot of stuff going on about the sustainable model with carbon, because buildings still contribute, I think, 30 to 40% of the carbon, of the greenhouse gases in their construction. So also there'll be 3D printing, very fashionable talk, but not happened yet. But it can come into facades more. And as I said, fire, I think, will grow into far more rigid models on sprinkling and compartment, and apart from high-rise refuge flows. Also, one last comment on that, projects I'm getting involved with in the US, the refurbishment market in the inner cities, there are huge blocks like Harrods and Selfridges, that size blocks, and clients buying up one or two of them. And this is for a live-work brief where people can live in, it's medium income with affordable mortgages tied in through the client arranging them. Very interesting financial model. And officers mixed in with them. And the advantage of all refurb is that, of course, you've got high thermal mass, and they're for temperate countries. And you can also open up light wells in there because they're all very deep plan. And that's a new thing coming. It's a tough order to design, but I think I can see certainly in the inner city, things like that happening as people are not all coming back to work in a rush hour and go back, the 85 days sort of stalling or changing to flexi time.
I was going to pick up on some of the points that Cecil made. We were very traditionally a RC company. It was always RC first, and we've really been looking much, much harder at steel, at timber, even for fairly tall buildings. In refurbishment, here in Hong Kong and Singapore I was previously, there's huge numbers of high-rise buildings built in the 70s and 80s that really aren't up to the market anymore. And in Hong Kong, we've had the habit of tearing them down prematurely. And so we're looking really very hard at that refurbishment market. We think there's great opportunity there. Another aspect that I'm working in quite personally is modular building. I work a lot in modular buildings actually for the UK student market, which we're building in Morocco, of all places. But this offers up a possibility after COVID, when a lot of more buildings are probably going to become more cellular. We may not see the big open offices. Then the office becomes a building type that's actually even possible by modular, where it really wasn't before. So we can see these forces coming together, the need for refurbishment. We understand there's going to be need for less car parks in cities. We've been looking at refurbishing even those by bringing modules into those. So I think there's a lot of very new opportunities that will be accelerated by the current COVID situation. Even if it's eventually forgotten, it seems to have really accelerated these trends.
Stephen, what do you think?
I think there's obviously repurposing old buildings is going to be a major segment of the industry, not just sort of relatively low-rise and historic things like downtown Yangon, but also the 50s, 60s and 70s tower blocks. And I think one of the interesting challenges in that is how you can actually create habitable space in a deep plan tall building. By habitable space, I mean residential space, because there's huge pressure always for residential as populations grow. I think one of the interesting problems that we've got is the industry has been able to come up with many, many, many different creative solutions to deal with envelope, MEP, windows, that kind of stuff. But to date, a solution for foundations seems to be eluding everybody. Piling, which is an interesting issue. If you look at something like Yoma Central, where you've got basically 60-meter deep piles that are 1.8 meters wide. Once you put them in, they're there forever. You're not going to do anything with them. So in the future, what can you do when you've effectively riddled the land with these very, very deep immovable piles, which will probably all be in the wrong place for some future purpose? How do you change the loading characteristics, and what kind of like sensible solution is there for that? Because it's basically every city in the world now is just pierced, punctured by thousands of these piles. What on earth do you do with them? It's an interesting problem because it ruins the site for future development, basically. I don't know, Cecil, what do you think?
Well, I think we have to move more towards, I agree with you on the piling. It's there forever, unless they're short piles like in Venice and their timber submerged in a
hairbrush. In fact, that's under the Secretariat. That's what it's like, Pinkadoo piles that are a couple of...
So I have favored a lot of combination between Dutch technology, which is always to float a building on their mud. I mean, they're experts at it, amazing what they can do. But that tends to be low rise, up to about 6 stories. When you get to 30 stories, you need to be doing something else. And some kind of, certainly deep basements, which are not that fashionable now. They were in the 80s, certainly in London and other areas I worked in. But developers or people fight shy of deep basements. But I think they can be very effective in offloading the piling effect. And one could have raft foundations with micro-piling underneath. So a smaller kind of needle pile, a needle raft kind of grouping. But you're based with the towers. Now on CCTV, the biggest building I've done, 50-meter square legs going up 240 meters, massive loads coming down on that building in Beijing. There it is a raft again. Piling would go on forever if you try to take the load in single points. So again, it's a deep raft, but then it's a monster to deconstruct. But on the other hand, it's easier with slabs of concrete, because when I was doing Battersea Power Station, and there was a whole history of deep foundations buried there, but they were all not piled. You know, they were all rafted, and you could get around it. And I dare say in future, it could be a bit dangerous, but there could be release agents embedded in capsules to start dissolving, and there might be mixes with the cement to come. I mean, concrete, like you say, one thing's never changed, is concrete technology. It's still what we did outside what the Romans did with pozzolanic. You know, nothing happened till 1890 and reinforced concrete got invented by the French in 1890 something. And it's still there, but there's an entire art form in concrete technology that's never been tried, aggregate control. I've been a big advocate of that, but you need the community of us to take on these things, but it can be done. And the aggregates could be far more intelligent in its application to also contributing to thermal mass. Yeah. You know, which is very important. So yeah, there are these old things that have been there forever, the assumption of piled buildings, tall buildings piled. Certainly in Hong Kong, everything is piled on the side there. I mean, my company, ex-company, Arab, did a lot of that work, incredible work, and hard to see what else to do on the side of a slope with a tall building because it'll slide off otherwise. But there, yeah, you touched on a problem, and I'm raising concrete as well as an old chestnut that never been tackled properly, ever, really. Nanotechnology, it is possible to get colloidal cements. A whole thing can be done, but it means investment and research and the contracting industry backing some of that. That's what's important.
Stephen, we've had some specific experience with that in Singapore recently. We've hit a site where the piles are in the way of our current project. And you face regulatory problems too. It's not only the technical problem, it's the regulatory problem if you want to make use of those again. But we've been learning from the Japanese. Apparently in Japan, you must leave your site clean when you demolish. You're not allowed to leave all this stuff underground. So in fact, they have some pretty amazing techniques for breaking out piles within the ground that we've started to borrow and learn from. So that we're started on that path, but this is new to us.
That's very interesting. That's interesting.
So it ends up being regulatory driven.
It could be as easy as a central bore left in the pile with an injection later that pressurizes it and then collapses the encase.
Okay.
Can be done.
Well, thanks. I think that's really great, and this is something definitely a topic to discuss at a later stage as to what technology can be brought to bear here in Yangon and other cities where what is the future of the pile once it's done with. I think a lot to be done there. I think I'd like to take the next question, if I may, and really also throw in Hugo here as well. The industry is changing in the way that we procure commercial real estate, and believe me, I'm having a little battle at the same time. Modern industries like tech, fintech, telco, FMCG are all nimble by default, whereas real estate is an ancient industry with old practices. Obviously on the construction side, but how do we make the spaces more user-friendly? And I think Cecil has touched on it already, but how to make it more flexible. And I think you can probably add in a question there for Hugo, how to make it more, persuade developers also to be more amenable on contracts.
Real estate being an age-old, tried and tested source of investment. I mean, real estate has always been very popular as an investment. It was supposed to be a finite commodity until everyone started reclaiming land all over the world. But ultimately, it is finite. And bricks and mortar. The old adage is that you could do a lot worse than investing in something that should be appreciating in capital value over time. Obviously that's market dependent and those markets are cyclical, so it's all about timing, but it's a highly illiquid asset, so there are huge preferences in other areas, particularly those areas that allow you to get your cash out quicker. But I mean, more importantly and more relevant to this conversation, how do we make workspaces more flexible? I mean, I'm just going to pick up on something Cecil said earlier. The workforce is becoming dominated by younger employees. And I think Cecil's absolutely right that we have to take that into account. Developers, agents, whoever is involved in the real estate industry. There was a study done in Vietnam recently looking at Generation Z in particular and how they differ from millennials. Because in Vietnam, it's estimated that the workforce is going to be made up by about 25% of Generation Z. Interestingly, in a survey done, the younger employees have responded overwhelmingly in the majority. 63% said that they would prefer to interact through instant message rather than through face-to-face meetings. Only 8% said that they would prefer face-to-face interactions. And only 9% said that email and 10% said phone call would be their preferred mode of communication. So 63% preferring instant message, of which text message is the least favorable. So as technology becomes more accessible and more widely used, I think we need to take that into account. Are there going to be empty buildings because the workforce is going to be working from home? I think globally there is a big push for as a result of COVID for businesses to look at how they can reduce their floor plates. How can they reduce their floor plates, but also provide adequate professional spaces in which they can maximize the efficiency of their workforce? There have been different responses to the work from home method. So, for example, in Hong Kong, HSBC have encouraged 2-day working weeks. And they're basically doing that because their share price is under a bit of pressure and they want to reduce their floor plate sizes. However, a Chinese bank in the same market in Hong Kong, they use their technology to try and understand how many people were saying they were working from home, but actually, how many people are actually doing it. And they found that 30% of their workforce were actually logging into their technology and registering that they were doing a day's work. So there's a bit of a disparity between cultures. I think mainland Chinese firms will probably prefer the bums on seats in offices, and I think culturally that's probably going to be favourable here. Other markets, I think, where there are larger cities, I think Myanmar, Hong Kong, Singapore, maybe even Vietnam and Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam don't really fall under this category. But you'll start to see satellite offices, or you'll start to see a work near home rather than a work from home structure, whereby there will be a smaller central headquarters where I think Cecil's absolutely right. There will be the requirement of executives to go to work still, but there will be the option for those who prefer to save the commuting time and go to a smaller satellite office, whether that is in the form of a serviced office or a co-location workspace, or whether it's a fully leased and fit out satellite office of the main headquarters, and then offer the right infrastructure and also the face-to-face capabilities that people do need. I think work from home is inefficient, and you can cover significantly more, particularly if you're project based, with face-to-face interaction. So I think that technology will increase the project team's ability to interact, and I think what we'll see in the future is probably offices that are less less open plan, because that seems to be the trend that Cecil was alluding to. We might be moving away from. And I spoke to a tenant based in Hong Kong recently that said, we haven't changed our office layout in 50 years, so we're actually ahead of the curve coming out of COVID, because we're able just to continue with our 1950s cellular plan. But it seems that the workforce do not really want to sit in front of the same person day in and day out. They find each other to be more irritating than beneficially sat with each other. But I think we'll start seeing clusters in offices where you'll have screens all over the office, and you'll have meeting points where teams can converge and have face-to-face interaction. But then you are then able to go away to any other part of the office, whether it's standing desks, whether it's private rooms, or whether it's in open plan or more co-location WeWork style locations, to plug in through USB your laptop and start doing your work, getting your work done.
I would
Stephen, what do you want to talk about? Jump in there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'd urge a little bit of caution in taking too much notice of surveys like that. I mean, our experience at Yoma is that after months and months and months of working from home, the entire workforce, we have to beat them off with a stick. They're all desperate to get back into the office to actually work with other human beings. I think that it's one of those things where you have to take the survey with a pinch of salt, really, because a huge amount of office work is essentially collaborative. And a lot of it is based on relationship and communication. And one of the things we've noticed as well is that anybody who's onboarded during this COVID time, where they haven't been able to form relationships with people, cannot work effectively with anybody else, because they haven't actually pre-established the relationship that's based on trust, knowledge of another person's capacity, what they actually mean when they're talking to you. So I think it really depends on the industry. I think people involved in analysis, research, possibly accounting, some of the sort of data-driven office works pretty good at work from home. But a lot of office work, I think in the business of design, particularly design with large groups, it's problematic actually working from home, because so much of the design process, multidisciplinary design process, can only be done efficiently if everybody's all together. And I think that kind of goes on to another point I just wanted to raise, which is, I thought, very interesting point, which is that despite all these amazing advances in technology and the ability to share and transfer information, the actual process of the design team working with the contractor to build something, as far as information flow back and forth, is probably more inefficient than it's ever been in the history of construction. There was some of you may know, there was a famous British architect called Lutyens, who was an Edwardian architect, and he just said, a drawing is simply a message to a builder. And I think that's a really, really good quote. And St. Pancras Station, when it was built at the time, was probably one of the most expensive buildings ever built. And that's a main railway station. And there was something like 20 drawings, and that was it. And the point was that everybody involved in the process, whether they were pricing, building, bricklayers, stonemasons, iron workers, whatever they were, all the people putting in the railway technology, everybody knew their job. And they needed the minimum amount of instruction in order to complete it. And one of the problems that we've got, I think, with the industry today is that it is incredibly inefficient, the way we do things. But the sheer numbers of bits of paper, emails, NCRs, whatever it is, going backwards and forwards between everybody is ridiculous. It's insane when you look at the finished product. I don't know if you'd agree, Patrick, but it's mad.
Very much so on both points. One, I think, because I work on teams that are UK-based, French-based, and they're working off the momentum of the personal relationships that were established before then. So I think it works fine for established teams, but we'll find ourselves 2 years down the road in a kind of pretty desperate place, I think, if we don't get to reestablish, those personal teams. But on the manner in which we manage projects, I think you're very much right. There is so much information that it's kind of overwhelming the people involved, and I think we can find a better way to manage than we are currently. It's hardly ideal.
I agree with Stephen. There is a valid point, what he's saying, in that people who know their jobs, you go back to the cathedral builders, there was the abbot or someone would say, well, I want a big nave and I want so many people in the church. And they got on with all the wonderful inventions of buttresses and everything, depending on the artistic skill, but they all knew what to do and carry that forward to Lutyens' period or beyond. And in fact, the best jobs I've ever done in London for offices has been with an agent and a developer and the contractor and myself all on board at the same time due to a certain procurement strategy we had. So we got this dilemma. Hugo's right as well. I mean, just a small example on my own staff here in a medium-sized office, closed down the offices with COVID, opened up through 2 hubs, everyday communication on Teams and cursor sharing. So the drawings are being shared and I'm commenting on every detail of a dimension even. But there's no substitute for face-to-face, particularly in design, side by side. So we meet in hubs as well, one in North London, one in South London, convenient to where the people are. And then one day only, all in the office as well, under rota systems of COVID for now. But once the vaccine's up, I can see some of the people saying, why don't we keep that model going? And so we got this dilemma where I think cellularization will grow with a trend towards executive. I think there may be a point about China, and cultural models are, of course, different. But I think there will be this trend. And against that, though, we know from modern thinking that interior space with shared spaces, even a super desk where 10 to 20 share one desk as part of the interior design, overlap zones for executives to bump into each other in corridors or certain meeting points, all help breakout zones to have people in an office mixing. And the productivity does raise because of the human interaction. There's no doubt, Stephen's right. The minimum human interaction does improve your understanding of your colleague, again, and where you are in your workplace. It does help. Corporate.
Yeah, there's something else happening in the workplace as well. With the greatest threat to occupancy rates in the next 10 years is not COVID and all sorts of design-related things. It's rise of artificial intelligence, which will actually just reduce the number of staff required in many specific departments to a minimum, and it will make the remaining human staff that much more valuable, and therefore the experience of going to work in relation to staff retention becomes that much more important. It'll no longer just be okay just to say, there's a desk, sorry, the window's 20 meters away and the toilet's 100 yards down down the corridor. There's your chair, good luck. People will have to listen very carefully to what the staff are actually asking for in terms of the quality of their experience, because so much is expected of the remaining staff that people have. And they will just go somewhere else that offers better conditions. Right. Cecil pointed out earlier, sustainability is a loose term that's open to a lot of interpretation, misinterpretation, and everybody probably has a slightly different view on it. But as far as the sort of commonly sort of clustered idea of environmental sustainability, I think there's been a general trend over the last 15, 20 years for grown-up buildings and grown-up developers to achieve some kind of accreditation under some of the schemes like BritCham or whatever. This is still in its infancy in Myanmar. And because it's not really, to go to Hugo's point earlier, it was not really valued or priced by either operators or developers. But it's something that is, it's gaining traction, particularly when you've got people like major institutions behind a project, IFC ADB, for example, who have very specific requirements now that are mandated by their shareholders in terms of meeting the very minimum in terms of environmental sustainability. So I think it's early days, it's in infancy in Yangon at the minute, but it is gaining traction and it's accelerating. And I think that what you're going to see in the next 2 or 3 years is that all the blue chip companies around the world will actually force minimum requirements on their operations, and so it'll be essentially a tenant-driven solution. If developers are not minded to accept it or adopt it themselves, they'll be forced to by the market. And the new disruptor, which I've mentioned elsewhere, is the concept of wellness, and wellness accreditation is creeping into the market. And some of the biggest companies in the world, the Googles, the Amazons, etc. of this world, on their procurement for new buildings are requiring accreditation in the concept of wellness. And this links back to the comments I made earlier about staff retention and the whole experience of being at work. So I think sustainability is a very, very interesting concept, and as Cecil said, it's much wider than just simple issues to do with energy and carbon.
Gotcha.
The office as I think what this discussion is also showing, the office as a container, because maximum return versus minimum cost, if you like. I mean, that's been a model for years. What's changing now is who are the workers is the question.
Yeah.
And what is their happiness quotient? Now, I almost fell off my chair at a board meeting in Europe about 10 years ago when someone quite blithely just said, what are we talking about here? Let's introduce a happiness quotient. And of course, you know, what the hell does that mean? But of course, with social media, that can make mental stress equal to office stress. This is a real problem for sure, particularly amongst the young, where mental stress has become a fashionable word for any kind of worry about your job or where you lie in the scheme of things. And so behavioral psychologists will play a part in this in future. And people like Google and Facebook and all can demand quite a bit because they tend to have low-rise buildings as well and very bespoke answers. But for general offices for the future, we may be having to come around to for want of a blunt word, happiness quotient, but well-being factor. The problem with this right now is that there's a huge amount of theory written by academics. Hardly any of that will come to pass in reality, how it gets done. It'll have to be done because people like us around this discussion table lead towards a calibration of sorts that makes sense, because there has to be certain efficiencies, not a rat race efficiency of 1 person per X square feet, but an entire holistic look at what does those group of workers do within that envelope when they come to work. And Stephen's right as well, AI will shrink everything. AI will not optimize office building technologies. That could be done with simple algorithms already. It's more to do with how we work and who are these workers in the future. That's the big question for me. Interesting.
I'd like to just jump to a few questions from the audience. The first one is from Neil Carmichael, who is incidentally the chair of the British Chamber's Energy Working Group, currently sitting in The Hague, we believe. Climate and COP26. Global ABC was launched at COP21 by the building and construction sector. Has it had any impact in the ASEAN, Asia, or in Myanmar? Possibly not. But I have seen some interesting examples, say, for example, in Malaysia, which are claiming to be 100-story buildings claiming to be energy-free, and so on. But I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are on it. Maybe Patrick, perhaps.
Well, I would just jump in to say anyone who says a building's energy-free is
I didn't quite believe it.
And all these audits about zero energy as well. Actually, a zero carbon building doesn't necessarily mean a good building as well. I mean, it's all being biased towards the academic papers coming through. It's in infancy, even in the West. It's hardly rolling out in Asia, but even here, really, despite 20 years of talk, it's not really rolling out in practical terms. Much like even urban planning theories, it stays theoretical still, beginning to become real, but not yet. Sorry to jump in on that one.
No problem. Patrick, you want to comment on that?
No, I was going to, COP21, not directly in Asia on what we've experienced yet. We do have a lot of clients come to us with real desire to produce a sustainable building and very much concerned about the wellness of their employees. We've been doing several corporate headquarters in Asia of late. But that desire is hard to, ultimately the buck stops with us and we have to build something very specific. And so in fact, we do rely very heavily upon LEED or BREEAM and the like to bring us, the client and the end user into agreement as to how we achieve these. And so right now we have to rely, I think, quite heavily on those kind of standards to let us go forward. But I think especially in wellness, there's a long way to go. Right now, I think the standards that we've been applying are a bit superficial, and I think I can really see that there's a lot of development in the area of wellness in buildings, particularly office buildings, where we need to go forward on.
It really answers Chi Sheng's question as well, as a movement towards green certification. So yes, there is a movement, but likely slow.
May I chime in on that, Peter?
Yeah.
Because just on this, it all comes down to the ability to generate revenue. And if there's a cost benefit. So in my experience in this part of the world, there's no necessity to increase your cost significantly by going down the green certification route, because quite frankly, the majority of tenants looking for buildings are going to be cost driven. And unless there is a multinational company who is going through a push down process from global HQs that require certain sustainability and green, environmentally friendly issues to be addressed in the construction, it's very unlikely that a tenant is going to pay more rent for a building that has that certification. Now, I agree with Stephen that that is changing. We are seeing far more tenants give us lists of criteria that involve that type of criteria. But unfortunately, over the last few years, we've still seen it be waived quite quickly in favor of more affordable rent. So in my personal opinion, unless there is a government initiative to enforce this type of certification, it's very unlikely that a developer, unless it is a grown-up developer, as Stephen mentioned, recognizing the marketing benefits, the value-add benefits of what's to come in the trends in the future. And I think Yoma Centre has done a very good job of identifying that, so that on the requirement from
because I think I don't disagree with you. It's just that people realise that just in the concept of energy efficiency, with energy being so expensive and water being so expensive in Yangon, if you can demonstrate to people that by taking reasonable measures, they're going to be saving 20–25% on their energy bills, that's something of very serious value to them. It's one of the biggest complaints that we have actually from owners, occupiers across the portfolio of Yoma is energy cost. And it's something that obviously we can just pass on because we're buying it from the government. We just pass on the government price. It's not that we charge it, it's just expensive. And the problem is, it's very significant cost in relation to the rental value, in the achievable rents or the achievable values in terms of the sales. So I think it's a question of marketing, actually. And I think you just have to explain it from the perspective of the use of the building, not at the point of the transaction. Because I think that the saving is enormous.
I agree. It's identifying those unique selling points of an asset, and then using that in your marketing to make it clear to a tenant that there is that cost saving in the future. However, it is more common at the moment that a tenant looking for space will be more concerned with the headline rent, and it may be further on in negotiations that they will even consider utilities and energy costs. So, but I do agree with you, Stephen, that that is changing, and we are getting more requirements focusing on green aspects.
You will certainly find that, and I think customers now are asking the entire spectrum of the question from okay, what's the rent, but what's the occupancy cost, and how much is the car park fee, and everything else associated with the total occupancy cost, and that's going to drive that. So,
by the way,
hear it from a customer.
Sorry, I can just add to that because I've just been sent an answer to this question from somebody listening in. Miss Tessa Morton, the Myanmar Building Code has just been updated, and it asks for a Myanmar-based green building certification. Not been reviewed the requirements in full yet, but there's increasing legislative focus on it in Yangon. So there you go, hot off the press.
Hot off the press. Thank you very much, Tessa. Well, gentlemen, I would like to say a big thank you today. We've heard today from subject matter experts collecting strong ideas on how developers teaming up with experts in their field covering design, construction, customer experience, and not least longevity and sustainability of the project. I'm incredibly grateful to Yoma Land and all the participants today for taking the time out and with the British Chamber to be with us. So on behalf of the Chamber, Cecil, Patrick, Hugo and Stephen, a very great thank you. And also a big thank you to Dora and all her coordination with the Chamber team. Thank you very much, and we look forward to doing it again in the very near future. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. And an excellent afternoon.